Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Healing Conversations. My name is einav, avni, and in the studio today I have Graham Skidmore. Graham, it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Wonderful. So before we get started, I'll read your bio so that we're all on the same page, and then let's see where this conversation takes us.
Fantastic.
Right, so here I'm quoting from what you wrote, right? I understood and played the game of life according to the status quo and checked the boxes of a six-figure income, nice house, car, country club membership, etc. However, at the height of my success, or the height of my success was also the height of my misery. Becoming a burnt out, miserable and unfulfilled corporate executive turned out to be my catalyst for healing physically, emotionally and spiritually through what I teach as the cycle of personal growth, restoration of my genuine and authentic self, and the reclamation of the connection of my higher and total self. As a result of my experiences, I believe we can create a world of happy, healthy, productive and empowered people. I believe the best way to achieve this is by investing in people as individuals and their potential. I've come to understand part of my purpose as creating the tools, education systems and community necessary to create a human-centric ecosystem with AI as a tool to augment human intelligence and capabilities. Wow, that sounds very
Well, it's like, you nailed it. We don't have anything else to talk about. We covered it all.
Now I want to dig a little bit deeper. Maybe you would start kind of at the beginning, right? You mentioned you kind of had it all, what a lot of people dream about and spend all of their manifestation efforts into getting. Here you are, and yet you're saying that was not it. So what happened? What happened then?
Yeah, well, like they talked about that, right? I learned how to play the game of life one way, and that led. I say won the game, right? Because that's not, but like I achieved what people said. Hey, if you do these things, then you're supposed to be, a healthy or a happy individual, right? And then along the way, I learned a different understanding of the game of life and how to play it differently. But kind of what got me down that path initially was, I was going along in my corporate world. I knew things weren't going well. I didn't know how things were going to turn. I just kept beating my head against a rock trying to figure out how to, become happy, how to, get back to myself, right? I can literally remember sitting in line with who I reported to, the CEO at the time, and saying at Starbucks, and I was like, man, I don't even know. Sometimes I don't even know who I am anymore. I feel like I'm just a conglomeration of learned behaviors and habits and masks to fit in. Like I don't even know who I am anymore, right? And so I didn't figure it out. I should also clarify that at this point in time in my life, I just thought of myself and understood myself as normal or most common, albeit a little different or quirky or, not fully fitting in, but I didn't think anything else of it besides that. Again, I kind of achieved the game of life. So I'm like, all right, there can't be, something too wrong with me, right? I figured out some stuff, so I got to have something going for me. I don't know what it is, but, and so, when you're successful, so to speak, according to the status quo rules, you can get caught up believing your own, pardon my language, your own bullshit, right? You can get caught up, and then you also, if you're, successful in the corporate world, then you get people that make excuses for you. So anyway, I only say that to say that, again, I literally understood myself through one lens and understood the world through one lens, and I didn't understand myself as gifted or, psychism or any mediumship, whatever somebody wants to kind of think about or relate to those things. And so I didn't pick up on, gut or intuition or guides teaching me, right? And somewhere, but I do remember kind of having this weird hint that like, okay, my time is running out here. And apparently, I didn't move fast enough, so the universe intervened, and, as it does. And I ended up leaving my career after 21 years, very unexpectedly. Unexpectedly for myself, unexpectedly for the organization, and as a result, I stepped away and was like, okay, something's missing here, because I played the game of life this way, I was supposed to feel a certain way and it didn't. So at the height of my misery, there's got to be something I'm missing. What is it? What am I missing here? And so I said, okay, before I can step into this next chapter of my of life, I got to figure out how to become healthy and happy again. I would wake up, things hurt, my body ached. I wondered why my body hated me, right? I had all kinds of aches and pains and ailments, stomach issues, digestion issues, headaches, nausea, constantly. Anyhow, so I started to understand myself then through the Western lens, and spending my time with doctors and things like that. And so then and along the way, I was diagnosed as autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, dyscalculia, math dyslexia, alexithymia, Irlen syndrome, which is why I wear these glasses. I don't know, I think there's one or two more, but I was like, all right, that's enough for me to kind of like digest about myself, and at that time, understanding myself through that lens was helpful, right? It allowed me to put words and to feelings that I couldn't before. It helped me to have a new vernacular to kind of speak to, helped me to understand myself in ways that I kind of didn't. But it also, that understanding also ran its course, because the same way that words lift us up, they can bring us down. So as I started to understand myself through the lens of symptoms and as problems, right, those things started to become much more predominant in my life. And all of a sudden I started struggling more with my motor skills, my communication skills, ability to put together sentences, all kinds of things. And all of a sudden I found myself going from a world that was kind of built around me, and I enjoyed the privilege that came with being a white male executive, to all of a sudden in a world that wasn't built for me, all of a sudden didn't make any sense to me, was very scary. And I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of issues that I'd never experienced before. I mean, so I then spent time going, okay, am I ever even going to be able to work again? And so, I definitely had to sit down and figure that out. Was I done? Did I figure out how to kind of pull it together for a few years, make as much money as I can, and then, retire before I totally burn out? I didn't know what my options were. And then, along the way, somebody I used to work with at Quicken Loans, you just had her on, Sunshine, or Jen Wichkowski, talking about addiction, right? She came back into my life. When she worked with me at Quicken Loans, she was like, all right, you're just too difficult. I can't even handle you. And so she went to work for another area in the company. And then, in 2018, 2019, we reconnected. And she was, or maybe 2020, either way, within a few years after leaving Quicken Loans, she reconnected, and she's like, hey, I know you're kind of going down this path, you're trying to understand yourself, but I'm getting nudged to let you know that, like, you should really start to understand yourself from a spiritual perspective of, like, being, psychic, medium, connected, these types of things. I was like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. That's no way. And then I started to understand myself through the spiritual gifted lenses, and I started to understand, the quote unquote, for me, the things that are symptoms of neurodiversity or challenges in my life. I started to understand them and resolve them by getting to know myself and actually recognizing that, that was my body didn't know how to tune into the proper radio stations. And so, it was system overload. It was constant frantic energy. It was feeling other people's emotions that I didn't understand, and having these spikes and thinking I was, crazy with these things. And so the more that I got to understand myself, the more that my self-awareness increased, the more that I peeled away the masks, the guilts, the shames, the fear, the anxiety, all the things that held me back from knowing myself and getting back to my genuine, authentic self. Along the way, healing occurred, confidence occurred, happiness occurred, getting back to, just identifying who I saw in the mirror, loving who I saw in the mirror, and going from looking at life and saying, well, I made all these mistakes, to now having gratitude for the journey that I had, because it was what I needed to experience to prepare me and give me the learnings and abilities for my next chapter of life. And so, so I'll kind of pause there to kind of say, part of my purpose and understanding of things was to be able to walk and understand myself through those different lenses, to be able to help others that are also looking to say, okay, through that firsthand experience. Anyhow, so it was quite the unexpected journey there. And so I spent the last 8 years getting to know myself, and that was really my job.
Mm. And I like what you said, like you said, it's the game of life. And when you started, or at least at some point, you're thinking really the way to win it is really to have the job, to have the money, to have all of these nice things. And actually, as often the case in many games, right, we have this unexpected turn or turn of events and showing you that really you are still, obviously playing, but the target, what you thought it was, is actually really not that. So kind of an unexpected turn to going within, to finding out about who you are and really what you're all about. And I think it's incredible because like we kind of said at the beginning, a lot of people really do think or believe, right, that this is the way forward. So I imagine that finding yourself in that place that says, actually, I'm here and it's not necessarily what I thought or expected, and also I have all the symptoms and labels to, that come with it. It must have been a very unsettling time.
It was very unsettling. The one thing that one of my sayings is that lack of choices makes for very clear direction, right? And so being unhappy and miserable was not a choice for me, right? And so just continue figuring out how to keep moving forward and finding happiness was the only option for me. And the things that were my, we talked about how the universe has its way of intervening and as appropriate. So the universe definitely intervened, right? I definitely didn't have a calm, I surrender, please guide me and I'm willing to follow anything you say kind of moment. I definitely came along kicking and screaming and still trying to do it my own way. Right? I definitely still leaned into my vices, but but my vices no longer worked, right? They no longer got me to where I needed to achieve. The result that I wanted was to adopt new behaviors, new perspectives, new expectations. And so it was really, a baptism by fire experience for me. But that's how I learn. I mean, this is one of the things that I've accepted about myself, was that I don't learn the easy way. But that's also that's part of my learning style. So I learn it in and out, and I understand the why behind it, and then it sticks with me. I tend to not repeat the same challenges.
I think what you're saying is that, and I think this is again something quite fascinating, because when a lot of the time when we make, we go through life and we figure out that this is not working out, this is not exactly, I'm not happy, or there's all these different issues, we don't usually make this kind of complete turnaround, right? We try and stay in our environment and everything that we learned and practiced and tried until now. So what was it for you that says actually, you said, right, you got the screaming and kicking, but how did you finally figure out that really it's not your way, it's the universe way? You really have to surrender and let go of all these expectations and in a sense everything that you've thought that you ever knew.
Yes. So first I want to touch a little bit on the money topic, because I think this is one of those things where, look, while money isn't the answer, I would be lying or not fully transparent if I also didn't acknowledge the fact that without money I could have never dedicated 8 years, right, without working, if I hadn't had some money to set aside to be able to do that for myself. If I didn't have some money, I wouldn't have been able to afford the healthcare practitioners and service providers that I needed to heal and understand myself and explore myself through various lenses. And so anyway, so one of the things that, and to that point, right, I didn't lack the access to healthcare. I didn't lack access to tools and resources. But the challenge was, everywhere I went, everybody just wanted to put me into their box. Oh, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to learn. This is how you need to be. This is the solution to your challenges, right? And based on how I'm wired in my way of learning, and especially with where I was at that point in my life, I was very afraid. I was totally deteriorating, and it scared the crap out of me. And so I wasn't about to let somebody else put me into a box until I understood myself, right? And so what ended up happening was, I had a moment in my living room where I just, I fell down to my knees. And at this point in time, I wasn't a spiritual person. I wasn't a spiritual person in my life growing up, religious or any of those types of things. But for whatever reason, I just fell to my knees, and I'm just like, please, God, anyone listening, just help me to bring some happiness into this world. It was very hard. I was very afraid because things didn't make sense to me. It wasn't intuitive. I couldn't make heads or tails out of things. And I couldn't get somebody to just work with me to help me get my feet underneath me to release that fear or anxiety so that I could listen to whatever guidance or help or, that somebody else had to offer. And so that was a real problem for me. But to answer I had kind of that moment, but then the other thing that occurred was I started keeping track, and I just called it, God time versus Graham time, right? What were the results, and how did things work out when they happened on God's time versus Graham's time? And I got to tell you, 7 years later, I've yet to win, right? Things continue to work out better when they unfolded as they were supposed to. And so, my analytical mind was very helpful in helping me to keep track of these things because I couldn't ignore those facts, right? I couldn't ignore the synchronicities. I couldn't ignore that things turned out better, and in ways that I wouldn't have ever thought of, or and unexpectedly. And I could never, and there was no way that I could logic my way to. I went from A to B to C. My way, because I had no idea how to get from A to B to C in the way that it actually happened. So there had to be something else working behind the scenes to bring these things together. And so that really was then what kind of started me down my path of being more comfortable to believe, being more comfortable to buy in, not requiring as challenging of learning experiences, being sometimes able to learn a little from a little more gentle nudges versus 2x4s across the head. And then as that just as those experiences continue to compound, I just finally did accept the fact that most of my problems arose from me not being my genuine and authentic self. And so I needed to learn how to live that way and live in my purpose if I really wanted to be happy. I didn't know what that meant, right? I just understood the concept.
Yeah. But it's kind of, it is still very interesting, I think, because what you are describing is a process where slowly you detached from your ego that says, actually, I should know better, or it should be my way, and learning maybe by trial and error that actually there really is something bigger maybe than you operating here, and I imagine that this journey was probably quite interesting, right? With okay, that worked, okay, that didn't work, or I should it's that kind of, when we look back we can say, oh, it took you 8 years to get to where you are today, but actually it's for a long time, I imagine it's really a day by day kind of existence, and finding out and questioning, and is that the right thing, or am I now operating from ego or from alignment? And it sounds like interesting.
Yeah, right. There's I think that this is one of those examples too, where like science and spirituality work together, right? I would form a hypothesis, I would then test it, right? I would get my results, I would, get my feedback, I would try to optimize, improve, right? Yeah, no, and to your point, then just eventually after so many times, you just go, okay, it is what it is. And not only did it take me 8 years to get here, I mean, it took me, probably, figure out how long I've been around, my consciousness has been around kicking, but, thousands or millions of years, I don't know, right? This definitely was a much larger accumulation of what's going on. And so then that also led me to, as part of that game of life, of recognizing that, I created all this for myself, right? I created my own living and learning experience before I incarnated. So if I really want to get upset with anybody, I got only myself to look at, because I'm the one who determined, what my purpose was going to be during this incarnation, what the lessons were that I needed to learn, what the personal growth was, what my acts of service were, all of those types of things. So, again, if I got any issues, I just got to look in the mirror and have that conversation. I got nobody to quote unquote blame. Yeah.
Absolutely. So do you, now that you're now working with other people in a similar situation, is it kind of like one size fits all? Like if you just go into your authentic self, if you let go, if you surrender, all of that, is that like the sure key to happiness?
Interestingly enough, one of the things that I spend my time on, right, is being able to create the systems that support individuality at scale, and that's meant to combat the one-size-fits-all system. So I'm trying to think how I want to answer this. Ultimately, it's up to everybody. Now, that being said, there are certain components that we all have to go through, right? Like it's going to be I'm not going to say impossible, but it's going to be very challenging to achieve the happiness, that the greatest happiness available to us while we're wearing masks, while we're operating from a place of fear, while we're allowing anxiety to do us, while we're not being our authentic selves, while we're not leveraging the gifts that we're given, right? While we're not appreciating who we are in the mirror, while we're not looking back at our life and having gratitude for the learning opportunities. And learning opportunities, I typically mean adversity. Western culture, it typically is mistakes and adversity only happen if you did something wrong, if it's your fault, if it's your blame. Well, according to the Earth as a living and learning environment, no, those are called catalysts to learn, right? So you've already got things at odds right there. And so one of the things that I do is help people to reframe and understand some of their history and their present through that lens, to start giving themselves grace, to give themselves that love and appreciation for their learning that occurred, and how those adversities aren't because they should feel bad about something that they did. They need to look at those and have gratitude because of the growth that it allowed for them to occur in their life, right? And so, yes, while those categories are kind of the same for everybody, each person has got their own journey of understanding those things, right? And one of the things that I learned along the way is that a lot of our ailments, illnesses, physical pains, are a result that's actually our feedback loop letting us know that, hey, we're not doing what we want to be doing. And again, that's not the same for everybody, right? Like, for me, I realized that a lot of my digestion challenges were because I didn't understand how my body would talk to me, right? Like I would have lower belly pains when I wasn't being true to myself. I didn't know that. I couldn't tell the difference between lower belly pains and I got to go to the bathroom, feelings, right? And so, but that doesn't mean that not being true, not everybody's stomach is going to be what talks to them when they're not being true to themselves, right? That's what I'm saying, right? So there's that whole discovery of, hey, this is my body, and how does it that my body talks to me, and what is it saying? And I think that's one of those things where that category is the same for everybody, but how everybody chose to build their body before they incarnated, that's where there's the individuality.
Yeah. I think it also, to add to that, of course, individuality is key, and everyone will have their own, levels of surrendering. And sometimes when I speak with people and I talk and I use words like surrender and trust and letting go and really kind of at least connecting with the idea that there is a bigger picture. So. And a lot of the time people have really hard time to know how to make that apply in their lives. So of course, if they have you or me or someone similar, they can they have the guidance, and that's wonderful. But also, if they want to do it by themselves, if they want to really start this journey on their own, the idea of surrendering or trust and not going about things with the need to control or using head versus heart kind of thing, they're really finding it kind of challenging. So what advice can we give these people out there?
Oh boy. Well, I think when you talk about such an important topic, and I guess that's kind of why I explain myself as, hey, I didn't know that I was gifted like this throughout my whole life, right? And I know that there's a whole percent, 20-30%, my guess would be about 20-30% of the population that fall into that same bucket of not recognizing those things. And so part of learning yourself and becoming comfortable with yourself comes from learning how to trust yourself. And the only way to trust yourself is through it starts, at least my experience is that it started with just having to have a bit of a faith/belief/ fake it till you make it mindset, where it was like, okay, I get that that the thoughts that are popping into my head aren't my feelings, they're the person next to me. Okay, so I've got to believe that, but how do I now kind of then validate that? Right? And so that's where actually, and again, Sunshine, right? She did these awesome things where they were, what did she call them? Like, I'm just going to call them a psychic circle, for lack of a better description, where we would get together and we would practice our skills. So it gave us that feedback loop to say, okay, I'm picking up on this, and then you'd ask that person, like, yeah, that is accurate. Okay, so then once you start to get that feedback loop for yourself, now you can start to build that confidence. But, being able to believe and trust these abstract things that your body's telling you, right, in a different way, I think that's probably one of the hardest challenges to get. And then from there, right, like if you are operating in flow with yourself and you're operating in tune with yourself, your feedback loop is going to be a positive one. It's going to continue to build on itself. You're going to see synchronicities. You're going to see people that cross your path or other things that reinforce what you're going through. You don't have to spend your time trying to find meaning inside of everything. It doesn't need, if you find yourself having to spend a lot of conscious time to find the meaning, you're probably working too hard. You got to kind of just sit back and let it come to you. Would be my advice. I don't know if that answers kind of where you're going at, but
yeah. I mean, there's no one answer, right? That's exactly the point. But I'm curious, when you mention happiness, I guess it's again, it's an abstract thing, right? So when you were in your corporate world and you recognize that you are not happy, so there was the lack of, right? So it's going on the negative. How do you know that happiness is what you have at the moment?
Yeah, so I do have a definition for happiness. Back in my corporate life, right? I looked at happiness was, do I want to get out of bed? Do I want to go do what I got to do? And was I happy about what I did at the end of the day, right? Generally speaking, a lot of those answers were, not so much, not really. But now, through my learnings and journey, I've come to define happiness as living a life of self-guided choices while being able to love myself, others, and my surroundings. And so if I find myself now not being at ease or, something just not feeling off, the first question I ask myself is, am I operating from my choices or from somebody else's? Am I being really true to myself and what I want or not? And that's kind of then my starting point to give myself that check and balance to figure out so I can, adjust it.
But that's the other question, right? Because say you recognize that you're really operating from someone else's choices, fears, expectations, all of that. How do you then break the cycle and saying, actually, it doesn't feel right to me and maybe it's not my choices? How do you then give yourselves this permission to say, what I want is bigger than what other people want and really be okay with that? Because I think that's something that is really holding us back. The fear and judgment and expectations and conditioning and all of that kind of stuff.
I mean, look, those struggles are very real, right? And I would be lying. I would not be being truthful with you if I just said, oh yeah, I just flipped a switch and everything was just simple. I understood, I didn't worry about what anybody else said, but that's not the case. That's not true. I definitely, some of my testing was doing that thing, right? Whenever I started, a couple of things on that. The way I got comfortable with it was going back to old people from my past that knew me the old way and introduced them to the new me and got their reactions. And some people were kind of like, all right, whatever, weirdo. Others were like, hey man, all I know is you were like miserable before, and like now you're like this happy person. I don't even recognize, and so I'm happy for you, right? And so getting that positive feedback from people that might be like, hey, I don't necessarily agree with how you understand yourself. Like those aren't my belief systems, but obviously they're having a positive effect on you, and you're my friend, so I just want to see you happy. So good, that's awesome, right? Like so that helped me to become much more comfortable in my own skin and doing that. And then the other part of the feedback loop was that I just felt better, right? Like when I wasn't myself, I'd feel heavier. I would feel more blah. I wouldn't have that kind. There is a certain feeling. It's definitely an abstract feeling of being connected, of recognizing that in some way, shape, or form you are cared for and looked after, and somebody is actually helping you, and you recognize that life is actually happening for you, not to you. And so the way that I would feel physically, emotionally, mentally, when I wasn't being myself, just didn't feel good. And when I did, and compared to when I did operate with myself, even though it may have gone against the grain. It just felt good. I just was no longer willing to make that sacrifice to feel crappy anymore. It felt crappier to go along and get along than it did to just stand on my own 2 feet on my own, and beat to my own drum.
I think it's also that sometimes you can't go back, right? When you start to recognize that there is a way that feels better, you can't compromise on that anymore.
Well, there's no doubt that there absolutely comes a point where once you open up Pandora's box in your spiritual awakening and you understand things, there is no going back. There is no putting that genie back in the bottle and going back to the old way of understanding and being. Life. Life is forever changed. There's no doubt. No doubt.
And so tell me, we mentioned earlier that there's systems and AI and these kind of things. How does that come to the picture?
Yeah, so one of the things that, going through my journey, right, I guess I realized, the systems are broken, not the people, right? I now that I know who I and abilities are, and I look at that compared to what I was, and like I said, I recognize, there's so many other people. Look, this is not like a 1 in a million story. There's all kinds of people. You have them on your show all the time that talk about how their life changed, they understood themselves differently, right? And so I said, all right, well, what's the common denominator here? Well, the common denominator that's holding all of us back from this are these one-size-fits-all belief systems and systems that say this is what it means to be human. This is what is, we are 5 senses. We are, we gain consciousness once we're born, and it's either, and we're all subject to the DNA lottery. And some of us got blessed, and some of us got, the short end of the stick. And so, and we're all, and then we've kind of normalized this feeling ill. And so, now the quality of life is determined by our ability to manage symptoms for the rest of our life. And those who can do that well, hey, you experience a better quality of life than others. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like a very fun and prosperous journey. Part of my gifts is system architecture. So after looking at that, I said, okay, well, one of the things that needs to be done is we need to be able to provide support systems to help people, that support somebody understanding themselves as an individual, and it to be able to be scalable, because that's always the pushback is, well, if everybody's a snowflake, then can you actually create a system to support everyone? Again, I don't know how to explain it, besides these are my spiritual gifts, allow me to understand those things and allow me to find those common threads that say, okay, yes, these are the categories that kind of apply to everybody. However, the journey inside of each one of those is individualized, and so it's more like, and so therefore this is where like AI and technology come into play, as opposed to using AI to give up our agency and having it tell us what to do, having it be more of a tool that helps to prompt us with questions, guide us towards healing, guide us more like decision trees to help us walk ourselves through how to make decisions for ourselves so that we're empowered and feeling confident to navigate life.
So what does that look like if someone, I don't know, is it someone that comes to work with you, or is that like an app that they can get? What does that look like at the moment?
Well, this goes back to the individuality. For some people, right, the self-guided journey is the underlying theme that applies to everybody. Now, but within, and then the layer above that self-guided journey, some people will, want to work with my AI tool is called Janice. And they may want to work with Janice alone. They may want to work with Janice and we have a role called a facilitator, which acts as a middle ground between member, the technology, and the network of practitioners to help them to get what they want out of it, right? So whether that be preparing, so they may want to work with the facilitator to prepare for their meeting with the practitioner, to make sure that they're asking the right questions, that they feel comfortable in knowing how to advocate for themselves, or after they meet with the practitioner, making sure to recognize, hey, what did I take from this? Did I get what I wanted out of this? And now how do I adopt this into my everyday life, right? And so, the facilitator helps the member to create their self-guided journey. And then the member, based on that, will tell them, hey, this is what I need from you. This is how I learn, right? And then we help them along that journey, however it is that they've asked for us to assist. So that's how, so that's our, and I should say we're just getting started on that. So that's how we've got everything mapped out, and we're just getting ready to kind of launch the first phase one of that, which, and where we're getting then our real life feedback and data to understand, the automations and the workflows, and see, what bugs there might be, or what's missing, or what needs to be adjusted, and things like that. So I don't want to give the impression that I got it all figured out, but I've got the skeleton figured out, and now we're just kind of working on putting some of the rest of the pieces together to again make sure that it works for everybody in everybody's situation.
It of course sounds incredible. I was wondering, even if it's not necessarily out there yet, or not exactly, it's not already, do you already have some maybe people who tried it and some more, I guess a little bit more example, or like a success story of someone who has used it and the results or the change that it helped them to achieve?
Interestingly enough, that's in recruiting the pilot program people is actually the phase that I'm in right now. So whether it be you or anybody that that would be, and I can, if I can send information on this, that would be interested in, having for free, right? Trying different healing modalities, and understanding different parts of themselves, whether it's wanting to explore their gifts, heal symptoms, enrich, their abilities, whatever, there is no, limitations on how they want to access or use things. All that I'm looking for in return is being able to get feedback and then testimonials to that point. So so some of the principles that were used to create content and guidance, yes, here and there I definitely tested all of these things with different people and stuff, but not as a full business.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I think this is probably the perfect platform for people who would be interested. I think pretty much anyone that is listening to this podcast is probably have something that they would be interested to get in touch and help you test this. So definitely, please leave the details so that I can share it with everyone. Yeah,
I'd love to, because the one thing that I guarantee is that we're never going to tell you, we can't figure it out. You're on your own. Right? If we can't figure it out, then our commitment is, look, we're going to figure this out together. Right? That's part of this deal, is having a partner in this in this game of life to help you figure this out.
But I really like that, what you're saying, because in my own energy healing practice, there was a time when I was more specifically working with people with chronic conditions, and now I've gone back to really just natural healing of mind, body, and soul. But I think one of the things that people with chronic conditions, more specifically, what they report is that feeling of loneliness on this journey, because there's maybe people don't, maybe like the doctors or family, maybe they don't necessarily either don't believe them or don't know how to deal with them or don't have patience for them. There's all of these different things, of course, depending on the condition and how long they've been suffering with that and stuff. So what you're saying is feeling so giving, because even if it's sometimes with a practitioner, maybe sometimes even if it's with AI, that you have some sort of communication and feeling that there is someone there to help you to understand things differently. It feels very, very giving.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is where, so I want to say kind of two parts to that. One is this, again, is where, me understanding myself through those different lenses so that I can be relatable to people was so important in my journey and my purpose here in this life. But it's not just me. I have a partner, Jamie, who is, also, who's a female. So we've got the male perspective, the female perspective, right? I understood myself going through a neurodivergent, and she understood herself only as a neurotypical, lens. We both ended up recognizing that we have more gifts, abilities, and wisdom than we realized, right? So that ends up being the commonality. I have taken a very non-traditional path in my, healing and living, and she's taken a very traditional path, right? She's, she would tell you, like, I was absolutely, school and me weren't going to get along. My just didn't translate to that. She loved being a student. She's got her doctorate now in chiropractic, physical therapy, and counseling. And so she brings a traditional lens, and as a female is able to recognize and speak to the same way that I can speak to, how I was underserved, right? As a female, as a woman, she can now speak to how she was underserved and being able to use her firsthand experience, to help people as well. So between the two of us, we've got a pretty broad range of life experiences to say, hey, it's not do what we did, it's, hey, here's how to figure it out for yourself. And then we'll help you along the way when you've got questions, or you kind of tag us in as you need to, and we'll figure this out together.
I love it. I love it. It's of course we are talking about AI, and some people are terrified, and some people are already using it and stuff. But it feels like it's a very interesting way of incorporating everything that you spoke about. Really, this journey. So not only recognizing that there are other ways to find your happiness, but also that you don't have to go about it alone, and it can be quite containing, regardless if it's a physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual challenge that you're going through.
And to that point, I think that people underestimate the power of healing that occurs simply from somebody letting you know you're not crazy. I've been there too, and it can be better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I spend plenty of time wondering if I'm crazy. I still, at times now, right? Because my ability to understand these things, I didn't have this knowledge, 8 years ago. All of these things are, has been information that's been given to me, as I've gained the comprehension to understand it and how to incorporate it and things of that nature. Yeah.
But it's part of what you were saying earlier, right? It's also when you're going through your own healing journey, regardless of the type of healing, it's that question of, am I listening to me and my body and my needs and all of that? Or am I listening to, maybe it's diagnosis from the doctors, or maybe sometimes the doctors just, they have an idea and they put you in that box that you mentioned earlier, right? So it is a part of it, is to learn to listen to you, to what feels right.
Yeah, and then you bring up another important point too, which is that it's one of the things that besides the individuality is that we focus on both traditional and non-traditional healing modalities, right? It's not about one or the other. It's about figuring out when to use which one and for what, right? We're not if you're on an antidepressant and you want or ADD meds and you want to stay on them, okay, right? Our goal is not to tell you to get off of things. Now, if you tell me you want to get off of things, then what I'm going to say is, okay, based on my experience, here's what I experienced getting off of these things. So if you want to do that, these are the things I would tell you to prepare for and to expect. And, to take and so then if you want to go through that, let's talk, this is when you then work with the doctor as well, right? So take my expectations from walking through that, but work with the doctor to also then take the medical perspective of it, right? And so, and learning how to blend those two things, the traditional healing modalities and the non-traditional healing modalities to get the best quality of life, right? I mean, there's no need to suffer more than you have to, right? I mean, any of us that have been on this earth for a few decades and then we go into this healing journey, we've acquired a lot of crap on us, right? We've acquired traumas and anxieties and fears and ailments, and that's not gonna go away overnight. That's not gonna go away with one sound healing session. That's not gonna go away with one pill, right? So if there's things that can help to, make that journey more enjoyable, look, I mean, that's a decision that everybody, needs to make for themselves. But most importantly, they shouldn't feel guilty about whatever choice they make, right? They should feel good and comfortable and confident with if they chose to, for however they chose to, to manage that.
So would that also be helpful? Because again, one thing that a lot of the time people report whenever they're going through some healing journey, maybe not necessarily an emotional or spiritual one, but more definitely physical, that there's some confusion about what is the best way forward. Not even about cancer and chemo and all of that. That's of course the question, but even sometimes people say, should I take this? Should I take this pill? Should I take this supplement? Should I take this? So there's a lot of confusion, and when they go on the internet, of course, there's a lot of there's overload of information and arguments to both sides. So with this kind of solution that you are proposing, will that help also with making a little bit more sense out of all the questions and stuff that people might have?
Yes, and I'll tell you, so the most, in a lot of the tradition, just going back to the AI and my comment earlier about, AI, the most common uses of AI are giving up our agency, telling us what to do, right? So in this example, right, a lot of, somebody would log into, AI and say, okay, should I do this or should I do it? And then they're going to get an answer, should they or shouldn't they, some sort of guidance. Where with Janice, my system, instead it goes, no, here's the questions that you should be asking yourself. And then, and then it kind of follows through that decision tree of based on this, based on these questions, now based on how you've answered these things, based on what your life goals are, based on the quality of life that you want to have, what path forward is most likely to give you the outcome that you desire. Let's start there. And some of that includes so it's some of that then is helping people to figure out how much benefit or help that they're receiving from taking that or not taking that. Because that's the other part of it is, hey, I've been taking it. I'm not really sure if it's helping or not. Okay, well, let's first figure that out, right? Because if that's like the first step. And so, it's not an overnight approach, right? Because in order for it to be empowering, that means you got to get to know yourself, which is a bit of trial and which is not a bit. It's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. But will people be required or asked to, I don't know, put blood test results and stuff like that, or is it really more slightly higher level than that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if they want to work with a practitioner who offers, let's say they want food sensitivities, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's, you can. If somebody wants to get a blood test for that, that's cool. We're not telling them what to do it, but that will be our role then is to provide access to a practitioner that offers that, and also our practitioners also agree that to honor the individual physiologies, to honor the fact that humans possess more than the 5 traditional senses, and that we're all, which is a really important thing if you're trying to, get your health care. Is a doctor, can't tell you that you're crazy for this way, that your lived experience is not real. I mean, that you tell somebody their lived experience is not real is the fastest way to drive somebody crazy, right? So
yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, so that will be, and so then from there it's our Janice will lead them down the path of making the decision for themselves. Can I get my answers to food sensitivities simply through, trial and error of trying foods, or do I not want to, or do I want to go right to the blood work, right? So it'll be like, okay, how patient am I to do this? How much time do I have to do this? What's the severity of my symptoms, right? Are they really major? And if they're really major, then yeah, you might want to, go get a blood test to get your answer sooner, to be able to get relief sooner. So it's, so it's all of those types of things to help people to figure out what information to take into consideration to make the best decision for them, their circumstances, and their goals.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating system that you're building, and it sounds like it can go incredible places. And maybe as we're nearing the time that we need to say goodbye, maybe share with us what is the dream with the system and with everything that you've learned about yourself and where you are headed yourself. What is that dream?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you mentioned earlier, right? My vision and my belief is that we can create a world of happy, healthy, productive, and empowered people. And I think when you categorize it like that, regardless of what ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, political affiliation, that's a description that that's something that most people can get behind. And so therefore, my belief is that, that we can also generate peace through unification, right? Unifying by investing into the human, investing into our future being about helping us to be better humans, and our future doesn't lie in the quality of AI, right? We have, through consciousness, we humans have everything that we need. Now, so that's where AI is a great tool to help us, just like a hammer or, is to a carpenter, but we need to be investing in carpenters. And so that's my ultimate vision is demonstrating, and I guess, and so the nature of my work is demonstrating these things, demonstrating the potential of humans, demonstrating, what we're capable of, that we can come together through peace, that we don't have to, because I've also got, I'm starting in health and wellness, but this goes into training and education and employment and income generation, and then as well as a societal structure to show how we can, the differences and valuing them is where we learn and to live and let live and operate through our differences so that we don't have to have these one-size-fits-all systems. I mean, that's really the biggest way for me to, I don't know, say that, the best way for me to buck the trend, the best way for me to fight back against the status quo is to provide a better path. Or at least, or an alternative path. And then when you do that, people can't say it's impossible. People can't say it can't be done, right? Because it's being done. And I think, and that's the most, that's the most impactful thing that I can think of to create meaningful change in the world is demonstrating what's possible. And taking people that were hurting, taking people that felt broken, that were ill, and all of a sudden now they're happy, healthy, productive, and empowered. I mean, what are you going to say? No, we don't want systems that support that. Get back in that box over here where you're miserable and taking the pills and providing big pharma. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, it'll be stuff that gets manipulated that way. But like, when somebody starts doing that, they look pretty silly pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, I guess that's maybe their path. Maybe they'll have to come back. Graham, we nearly need to say goodbye for today, but what is one last message that you have for people listening or watching?
The one message that I would have for people is give yourself the same grace that you give to others. Give yourself the same acceptance that you give to others. Give yourself the same love that you give to others. And recognize that you were never supposed to have it all figured out, and that it was never supposed to be a simple, easy path. Everything, right? You were here to learn. You were here to learn through experience. You were here to experience the good, the bad, and the ugly to learn from. But one of the things that you were here to learn is how to love yourself. So please don't ever lose sight of that, and always, stay focused on that.
I love this message. It's so deep. I really feel it. It's like you're not meant to have it all figured out. Oh wow. How interesting. It's complete opposite to what we so often do, right? We so go, and it's like, hey, hi. It will come to you when the time is right. It will come to you. Just chill.
That's why it's so important to learn how to trust yourself.
Yeah, indeed. Right. Well, Graham, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for sharing your journey, and for also the new dream that you are currently building. And I'll just say to anyone watching, listening, please do like, share, comment. We really want to get to anyone who needs to hear this, and a lot of us do need to hear this message. So thank you to everyone watching. Graham, thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to share my thoughts with your listeners. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.